The smell came first. That was the thing nobody had prepared for. The engineers had run every calculation. The geologists had tested the soil samples pulled through the microdrills for 40 years. The biologists had confirmed the atmosphere was breathable 3 separate times, but nobody had written a single word about the smell. Dara Volkov pressed her palm flat against the cold metal wall of the exit corridor and breathed it in. Earth air, real air, air that had never been recycled, never been filtered through carbon scrubbers, never been shared with 10,000 other people in a sealed tunnel 3 kilometers underground. It smelled like wet rock and something green, and something she had no name for, because no name existed in any underground dictionary. Behind her, 40 soldiers stood in full gear and said nothing. The blast door had taken 11 minutes to open. Pyotr Sol had spent 4 decades working on that mechanism, replacing corroded parts, rerouting hydraulic lines, arguing with the council every year for more metal and more time. When the door finally moved, he had sat down on the floor and put his face in his hands. His assistant thought something was wrong until she heard the sound he was making. He was laughing. Now Pyotr stood 2 steps behind Dara, scanner in one fist, canteen in the other, smiling so wide it looked like it hurt. Dara stepped through the door. The corridor opened onto a narrow ledge of rock, and beyond that ledge the world simply continued. Not ruins, not ash. The old records had shown ash. Endless gray ash spreading to every horizon, taken by satellites in the days just after the burning. 3,000 years had done what ash always does. When left alone, it had become soil. The soil had become something else. Forests, old, enormous, indifferent forests that had no idea a species had died nearby, and no interest in the fact that the same species had just walked back into the light. Dara stood on the ledge and looked at the trees. They were tall enough that she had to tilt her head back to find the tops. The bark was pale gray and smooth. The leaves were a dark red color she had only ever seen in old photographs, and even then the photographs had looked faded and unconvincing, like someone had guessed at the color. The real thing was nothing like a guess. Lena Hurst pushed forward and stopped at Dara's shoulder. She was 26, trained as a navigator since age 9, and had memorized every star map in the archive. She had spent her whole life preparing to go into space. She had not thought much about the ground she would cross first. She looked at the forest and forgot, for 30 seconds, that she was supposed to be a professional. "It's real," she said. "Yes," Dara said. Pyotr was already scanning. Air composition confirmed. Temperature is 9 degrees. Wind from the northwest at low speed. I am reading animal life signatures in the tree line. Nothing large enough to register as a threat. He paused. I am also reading something else. About 400 meters northeast. Structural remains, old ones. Dara looked north. Through the trees at a distance she could see something. That was not a tree. A shape that was too straight, too deliberate, too broken in the specific way that only things built by hands could break. She signaled 2 scouts forward and followed into the trees. The forest floor was soft. Every step pressed down into layers of dead leaves and dark soil and roots that ran in every direction like the underground had followed them up. The light came through the canopy in long, pale columns. Somewhere above, a bird was making a sound that did not match any recording. In the archive, the structural remains turned out to be a street. Not much of one. 3 sections of old road surface still visible between the roots, cracked into islands by 3,000 years of freeze and thaw and growth. On one section still legible under a thin crust of lichen, a faded yellow line, a lane marking, old enough that the paint had fossilized into The concrete itself. Lena crouched next to it and ran her finger along the line without touching it. One of the scouts found the sign 15 meters further in. It was iron, and the iron had rusted into something closer to orange lace than solid metal. But the lettering was still there, pressed deep into the original surface by whoever had made the mold. 2 words and a number in a language that every child underground still learned to read because the council had decided 3,000 years ago that forgetting the old languages was the same as letting the Drath win. Lena read it out loud. Her voice did not shake. She was proud of that later. Piotr checked his scanner. No Drath signatures in the solar system. No signals beyond background radiation. We are alone here. Dara nodded. The Drath had not come back to check their work. Why would they? They had been thorough. They had been certain. That certainty was going to cost them something. She turned to the group behind her. 40 faces, all born underground, all raised on the same stories, the same maps, the same weight of 3,000 years of waiting. We go back inside, she said. We report to the council. We begin the launch sequence. She looked once more at the fossilized yellow line in the old road. We have been ready for a long time. Now we are also here. Nobody cheered. They were not a cheering kind of people. They walked back through the forest in silence, and the bird kept singing. And the trees stood the way they had stood for 3,000 years, patient and enormous and completely unaware that everything was about to change. The wall of memory was 3 kilometers long. It ran along the deepest tunnel in the entire bunker network, carved directly into the bedrock of the Ural Mountains, and it was covered from floor to ceiling in names, not printed, not stamped, carved by hand, one name at a time, by generation after generation of people who had never met the dead but refused to let them disappear. Admiral Gregor Moss walked the length of it every year on the same day. He was 71 years old. He had walked it 53 times. He did not walk quickly. He never did. He moved with one hand slightly raised, close to the wall but not touching it, the way a person moves near something that matters too much to treat carelessly. The names blurred together at this. Distance became texture, became the face of something too large for anyone person to hold. He did not try to hold it, he just walked beside it. At the far end of the wall where the final names were carved, the stone changed. The earliest carvings were deep and precise, cut by people who had time and tools and grief that was still fresh enough to need an outlet. The later names, carved by people who had only heard of the dead through stories, were shallower, more careful, like they were afraid of making a mistake. The very last names on the wall were carved by children, under supervision. As part of their first year of school, the tradition had started 1,100 years ago and had never stopped. Moss pressed his palm flat against the last name on the wall. The stone was cold. It was always cold down here. He heard Dara Volkov's footsteps before he heard her voice. The council has approved the full launch sequence, she said. We go in 32 days. I know, Moss said. He did not move his hand. I was in the meeting. You left before the vote. I knew how it would go. He finally turned around. He was a large man who had become a lean one, the way old soldiers do when the decades take the weight but leave everything else. His eyes were the particular kind of calm that comes from having waited so long for something that the waiting has become part of who you are. I wanted to be here when it was decided. Dara stood beside him and looked at the wall. She had been here many times, but it hit differently now. In 32 days, every person in this bunker who could hold a rifle or read a navigation panel would be moving toward the sky. The wall would be left behind. That was the part nobody talked about. The Ver navigator sent another signal, Dara said, from 2 systems out. The translation team has been working on it for 4 days. Moss raised an eyebrow. The Ver, the small furred traders from the outer belt records. Yes, they have been attempting contact since our first surface transmission. They seem to know we are here. She paused. They seem to know what we are. Moss was quiet for a moment. How is that possible? Old records, apparently. Their oral history preserves accounts of Earth from before the burning. They called us the Deep Ones, the people who went below. He looked at the wall again. They thought we were dead. Everyone did. The launch 32 days later was nothing like the simulations. The simulations had been run 10,000 times over the past century. Every variable had been modeled. Every failure point had been identified and reinforced. The engineers had wargamed the ascent in their sleep, and most of them had actual sleep with those exact scenarios. Piotr Saul had once told Dara that he had dreamed about the launch sequence so many times that, when he was awake and thinking about it, it felt like a memory rather than a plan. The actual launch felt like neither. It felt like being pushed through the center of the Earth by something that had been holding its breath for 3,000 years. The lead ship broke atmosphere 4 minutes and 17 seconds after ignition. Dara was in the command seat. She had not been told to sit down. She had simply sat at the exact moment the shaking started because her legs had decided to stop pretending this was routine. Through the forward viewport, the sky went from gray to dark blue to black. In the space of a long breath, stars appeared. Not the simulated stars from the navigation rooms, not the projected stars from the astronomy modules, real stars burning at distances the human mind was not built to understand, arranged in the exact same patterns that every child in the bunker had memorized since they were 5 years old. Behind Dara, Lena Hurst was doing her job, calling out positions, confirming coordinates, checking the fleet formation as ship after ship punched through into open space. Her voice was steady. Her hands, Dara noticed, were gripping the edge of her console hard enough to whiten the knuckles. The fleet assembled over 3 hours, 212 ships built in the dark over 1,000 years, designed by engineers who had never seen the sky, now floating in open space in precise formation. Moss's voice came over the command channel from the fleet carrier at the formation center. All ships confirmed. Formation is holding. A pause. Commander Volkov, what are your orders? Dara looked at the stars. She found the one that the old navigation records marked as the direction of the Drath home territory. It looked like every other star from here, small, cold, indifferent. She gave her first order as fleet commander in 4 words. Set course, we go. The distress signal was not in any human language. Every language humanity had spoken was stored in the bunker archives, and none of them matched the repeating pulse from the small vessel drifting at the solar system's outer ring. It broadcast on a frequency no human radio was built to use. The only reason the fleet picked it up was because Lena Hurst had quietly reprogrammed the long-range sensor during the 3rd week of travel, expanding their listening range into spectrums the engineers had marked as empty. She had done it because she was bored and could not sleep. She reported it to Dara without drama. Small vessel, non-human design. It is broadcasting what my analysis software is calling a repeating distress pattern. The structure matches distress signals across multiple species in the old pre-burning contact records. She looked up from her screen. They are in trouble. Dara looked at the sensor image of the vessel. It was roughly the size of one of the smaller human scout ships, built in a curved organic style that suggested the people who made it thought of ships the way humans thought of. Animals, something grown rather than assembled. The hull had 3 deep scoring marks along its left side, weapon burns, recent ones. Who hit them, Dara said. Unknown. The burns match no weapon profile in our records. Dara thought for 4 seconds. We bring them in. The crew around her was quiet in the particular way that meant they had questions and were deciding not to ask them yet. The docking took 2 hours because the alien airlock used completely different logic from a human one, and Piotr had to design a connecting sleeve from scratch using only what he could see through the viewport and what his hands could figure out by touch. When the seal confirmed, he exhaled slowly through his nose. Done, he said. The beings on the other side of the hatch were not what the crew had expected. There were 6 of them, small, reaching only to a human's chest, covered in short, dense fur in shades of brown and amber. Their faces were wide and flat, with large dark eyes that reflected light like polished stone. They wore layered garments in many colors, practical rather than decorative, and 2 of them were injured, one with a burn on the arm that had been wrapped in something soft and bright green. They stared at the humans. The humans stared back. The eldest of them, a small being whose fur had gone silver around the face, and whose eyes moved with the particular steadiness of someone who had seen many strange things and survived them, stepped forward. It spoke. The sound was musical and layered, several tones at once, and the translation software produced nothing for 3 full seconds before outputting a rough guess. Uncertain, we thought gone world, below people, old story, real. Dara looked at Lena. Lena was already adjusting the translation matrix, pulling vocabulary from the partial contact records in the archive, referencing tone patterns. They know who we are, Lena said quietly, or they know what we were. The eldest was still watching Dara. It had not looked away once. Its eyes moved over her face with an expression the translation software marked as unknown emotional state, but that Dara recognized without software. She had seen it in old photographs from the bunker archives, in the faces of people told something was impossible, who were now watching it happen anyway. She put her hand flat on her chest and said her name slowly. The eldest repeated it imperfectly, in a voice that turned the consonants into something softer. Then it placed its own hand on its chest. The translation software produced Sovi, Elder Navigator, their family ship, crossing between reigns. Over the next 6 hours, with Lena rebuilding the translation matrix in real time and Piotr treating the 2 injured Ver with a medical kit and patient miming, the story came out in pieces. The Drath still existed, more than existed. They controlled dozens of systems. They had not changed their methods in 3,000 years because they had not needed to. Nobody had made them need to. The small Ver trading vessel had been hit at a border checkpoint for failing to pay the Drath transit tax on time. Not an act of war, not an example. Just routine. This was routine for them now. And then Sovi said the thing that made the room go quiet. The Drath had erased humanity from their records, not hidden it, erased it. No record of Earth, no record of the burning, no record of what lived there. They had not kept it as a trophy. Humanity had not been worth remembering. Dara heard this and felt something settle in her chest like a stone finding the bottom of still water, not rage, something under rage, something older. Sovi watched her face carefully. Then it asked, through the translation software, where the human fleet was going. Dara answered honestly. Sovi was quiet for a long time. Then it conferred with the other Ver in their layered musical language. When it turned back, the translation software worked hard and produced, "We will guide you not for politics, Some wrongs are too heavy to walk past. We know this weight. We have carried it also. Dara looked at this small, silver-furred elder who had volunteered to lead a fleet of resurrected ghosts toward the empire that hit them for a late payment, and felt something that was not grief and not fury and not cold purpose. She felt gratitude, real and specific and surprising. "Thank you," she said. The translation software gave Sovi those two words. Sovi straightened up to its full height, which was not very tall, and nodded once with great dignity. The fleet changed course. The Ver ship flew at its side, small and scarred and present, and together they moved toward the dark. Nobody in the Drath garrison at Vreth Station had ever run a combat drill. This was not unusual. Vreth was a border checkpoint, not a fortress. Its job was to collect transit taxes, scan cargo holds for contraband, and send a quarterly report to regional command. The garrison soldiers had weapons and knew how to use them, the way people know how to use things they have never needed, theoretically, calmly, without urgency. The human fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel at 3:40 station time, when 2/3 of the garrison was asleep. The automated challenge signal fired immediately, standard procedure. It broadcast on the universal open channel in Drath script the same message sent to 10,000 ships in the past century. Identify yourself. State your cargo, prepare for inspection. Piotr Saul read it, confirmed the translation, and drafted a reply. He had been preparing it for 3 weeks. He read it to Dara before sending. She listened without expression and nodded once. He sent it. In the Vreth Station command room, a night-duty officer named Brecht pulled the incoming message onto his screen and stared at it. He read it again. He called his supervisor. His supervisor read it and called her supervisor. The reply moved up the chain, not because anyone believed it, but because nobody wanted to be the one who decided how to respond to a message that said, in clean, formal Drath script, "We are humanity. We have returned. Surrender the station or we will take it." The station commander reached the command room in 4 minutes and read the message twice. Then he laughed because the only other option was to be afraid, and he was not afraid of ghost stories. He ordered battle stations, mostly as a formality, and transmitted a reply calling the message a poor attempt at provocation. The human fleet opened fire before his reply finished transmitting. The engagement lasted 19 minutes. The human weapons were not elegant, designed 3,000 years ago from partial records and educated guesses, then refined by 1,000 years of iteration, always aimed at the same target, always built around the same question: what would hurt a Drath ship most? The answer arrived at after centuries of work turned out to be pressure, specifically rapid pressure strikes against the structural nodes holding Drath hull sections together. It did not destroy ships outright, it made them fall apart. The garrison's 6 patrol ships came apart in sequence, clean and fast, with none of the long, dramatic explosions the old human entertainment archives had taught people to expect from space combat. Just 6 ships, then 6 expanding clouds of debris and escaping atmosphere. The station itself surrendered 11 minutes after the last patrol ship went dark. Dara did not celebrate. She walked the captured corridors with 4 soldiers and made a list of what needed doing. The garrison troops were disarmed and placed in their own holding facility. Communication records were copied. The supply manifest was cataloged. Everything done quickly and without cruelty, because there was no time for cruelty and no appetite for it. In the station commander's office, Dara found the man sitting very still at his desk. He was large even by Drath standards, with the heavy gray-ridged features of someone who had spent a career being certain of things. He was not certain of anything now. He watched Dara stand before his desk, and the expression on his face was the same one the night officer had worn when he first read the message. He spoke in Drath. The software rendered it as, "You cannot be real." "We have been real for 3,000 years, Dara said. You simply stopped paying attention." She left him there and went to the communications array. She broadcast on every open channel within range, the same 9 words Piotr had sent at the start. No additions, no demands, no speech about justice or vengeance or the weight of history. Just those 9 words sent outward in every direction the array could reach, because they were enough, and anything added would only make them smaller. "We are humanity. We have returned." 400 light-years away, in a Drath Regional Command Center, an officer pulled an ancient sealed file not opened in living memory. It contained one record, a classification report for a small blue planet in a quiet system. Assessed as neutralized, cross-referenced to nothing, archived and forgotten. The date on the file was 3,000 years old. The officer stared at that date for a long time. Then she began composing an urgent report to the High Council, choosing her words carefully because the words she needed had not appeared in any official Drath communication in 3,000 years. She wrote them anyway. There was no other honest option. The words were, "They are alive." Back on Vreth Station, Sovi found Dara at a viewport looking at the debris field where the patrol ships had been. The Ver Elder stood beside her in silence. Then it said, in the careful words the translation software handled, "Best, was this what you wanted?" Dara thought about the wall of memory. 3 kilometers, 11 billion names. Children carving carefully, so they would not make a mistake. "No," she said, "but it is what was necessary." Sovi nodded slowly. "Yes," it said, "that is the difference." The Nas arrived without warning. Their ship appeared at the edge of the human fleet formation 4 days after. Vreth Station, a long dark vessel that moved in a way no human ship moved. Slow and deliberate, like something thinking before each step, it broadcast. No weapons signal. It did not attempt evasive action. It simply arrived and waited, and when Lena hailed it, the reply came in broken Drath trade script that the software translated as, "We heard the 9 words. We are Nas. We also remember, may we stand with you." The Nas were tall. That was the first thing the human crew noticed when the delegation came aboard. 7 of them, each one nearly 2.5 meters. With smooth dark scales and layered bands of color and wide-set eyes that moved independently of each other, watching 2 directions at once. They walked slowly and spoke slowly, and their translated voices carried a weight that the software rendered flat, but that everyone in the room felt anyway. Their homeworld had been burned 200 years ago, not erased from the records the way Earth had been. The Drath remembered the Nas listed them as a resolved territorial dispute in the regional files. The Nas had survived by scattering family groups on cargo ships and colony vessels. No home, no ground, no planet to stand on. 200 years of drifting. The eldest of the delegation, a Nas named Oru, stood in the center of the meeting room and looked at the humans for a long moment before speaking. The software translated, "You went below the ground. We went between the stars. We both kept ourselves. We both came back. This is the same thing." Piotr, standing near the door, said very quietly to Lena, "They have been waiting for someone to start." She nodded. "Everyone has." The coalition grew. Word traveled faster than the fleet. By the time the human ships crossed into the second Drath border system, 11 other species had made contact. Not all of them joined. Some sent only observers, small ships running quietly beside the fleet, watching. Others offered supply and Navigation data. Two species sent formal letters of neutrality that read, to Dara's eye, like letters from people who wanted to help but were not yet certain the help would matter. She did not push them. They would decide when they were ready. The second system engagement lasted longer than Vreth. The Drath had repositioned two heavy cruisers there after the first battle, and the human fleet encountered them at the system's edge with no cover and no time to plan. Dara made 3 decisions in 6 seconds. She ordered one wing of ships to pull back, drawing the cruisers forward. She ordered the Nas vessel, which had weapons. The human engineers spent 3 excited hours studying after the delegation arrived to hold position behind an asteroid body, and she ordered Piotr to calculate the exact moment the Drath cruisers would cross between the human wing and the Nas position. Piotr calculated it in 90 seconds. He was proud of that time later. The Nas weapons did not look like weapons. They generated a field that disrupted the electromagnetic systems running Drath ship guidance, not permanently but for long enough. The Drath cruisers went briefly blind and the human fleet closed the distance. It worked. The cruisers surrendered intact. That night Dara signed 11 casualty reports. 3 human crew members had died when a Drath return shot caught the edge of a smaller escort vessel. She wrote each name by hand in the fleet log. She had been doing this since Vreth. She would keep doing it. There was no one else whose job it was, and she had decided on the first day that it had to be someone's job, or the names would become numbers, and the numbers would become background noise, and that was how it started, the drift, the slow slide from people into statistics. She would not allow it. Oru found her in the log room still writing. The tall Nas sat on the floor, because the chairs were the wrong scale, and watched her work with those wide-set independent eyes, each one tracking something different, and waited until she set the pen down. "You write the names yourself," Oru said. "Yes. Our leaders did the same, before, when we still had leaders who stayed in one place." The software paused on the next words and then rendered them. "Carefully, it is how a people stays a people, when the ones at the top remember that the ones below are not pieces but persons." Dara looked at the page of names. "How did you keep yourselves together?" she asked. 200 years, no ground, no home. How did you stay Nas?" Oru was quiet for a long moment. The independent eyes settled, both of them pointing at the same place, at Dara, in a way that felt like the full weight of the Nas elder's attention being gathered and focused. "We kept our arguments," Oru said. "Humans kept their names, we kept ours. Every family argues about the right way to cook the evening meal, and the right way to greet the morning, and the right order of words in the old prayers. We never stopped arguing, and every argument meant we were still us." Dara stared at that for a moment. Then she picked up the pen again. "Tell me the names of your 3 best navigators," she said. "We are going deeper, and I want them reading alongside Lena." Oru straightened up slowly, all 2.5 meters of them, and for the first time since boarding the ship, the Nas elder made a sound the software could not translate, but the meaning was clear enough. It was something between relief and recognition, and it did not need words. The Drath High Council sent their offer on the 9th day of the siege. It was a long document. The legal team had clearly worked hard. There were formal acknowledgments, structured apologies in official diplomatic language, offers of territorial concession across 4 systems, trade agreements, reparation frameworks with specific numbers. It was thorough, professional. The kind of document produced by people who believed the right arrangement of words could contain anything, even this. Dara read the whole thing. She sat alone in the fleet command room with Sovi at her left and Oru at her right. the Ver elder barely reaching the table. Edge, the Nas elder folded carefully into a seat built for someone smaller. And she read every page while the two of them waited. When she finished, she set it down. They want to keep the Empire, she said. They want to pay us and keep. The Empire. Sovi said nothing. Oru said nothing. They had learned when to let humans reach their own conclusions. Dara drafted her reply herself. She did not use the legal team. She wrote in plain draft trade script because she wanted the meaning to arrive without any room for interpretation. The Drath Collective will dissolve. Every world under your control will determine its own future. The Drath people will not be harmed, but they. Collective ends. These are the terms. There will be no others. The Council's reply came in 40 minutes. Refusal. They ordered their remaining fleet to hold the home system perimeter and engage. The battle that followed lasted 9 days. There was no single moment that decided it. No dramatic turn, no heroic charge, no speech that changed everything. It was 9 days of sustained, grinding, coordinated pressure from a coalition that had stopped being a collection of separate grievances and become something else, something that moved together, adapted together, covered each other's blind spots without being asked. Lena and the 3 Nos navigators had built a shared tactical map that none of them could have made alone. The Ver knew Drath's supply line patterns from a century of trading in their space and fed that knowledge into every interdiction run. Human crews who had trained their whole lives for exactly this kind of sustained operation kept their stations through exhaustion. That would have broken people fighting for something they chose rather than something they were born into. On the 9th day, the Drath High Council transmitted the surrender flag. Dara was in the medical bay when it came through. She was sitting next to Admiral Gregor Moss, who had taken a fragment wound in the 7th day's engagement and was angry about it in the specific way of old soldiers who feel their bodies have embarrassed them. He was going to recover completely. He was furious about the time it would take. When the surrender signal sounded through the ship, Moss went quiet. He stared at the ceiling for a long time. Then he said in a voice that was very even, "Tell me that is what I think it is." "It is," Dara said. He closed his eyes. He did not make any other sound. He did not need to. Dara did not attend the formal surrender ceremony. She let the council representatives and the coalition delegates handle the legal structure. She had a ship to get back to. She set course for Earth before the ink was dry. The flight home took 3 weeks. The whole fleet came with her, even the Nos ships and the Ver family vessel, because Sovi had said simply that. They wanted to see it, the world that went underground and came back, and nobody argued. They landed on a wide hill above the ruins of what the archive maps called a major city. The ruins were barely visible now, swallowed by the same slow forests that had covered everything else. A few foundation lines showed through the undergrowth, the shape of old streets in the way the tree roots grew, nothing more. Dara carried a small metal case. Inside it was a stone tablet, the first stone ever carved on the wall of memory, the original piece placed 3,000 years ago by the woman who sealed the bunker door and saved the first survivors. The council had voted to let Dara bring it up. She had not asked for the vote. They had called it anyway, and it had been unanimous. She set the tablet in the ground at the top of the hill. She pressed her palm flat against it, the way Moss had pressed his palm against the wall, the tunnel, and she stayed there for a long moment with the cold stone under her hand and the wind coming from the northwest and the smell of earth air that still had no name in any underground dictionary. Then she sat down in the grass. After a moment, Piotr sat beside her, then Lena, then the surviving crew who had been there when the door opened, all of them sitting on the hill in the wind. Sovi settled nearby, small and silver-furred and patient. Oru folded long limbs and sat on the other side, two sets of eyes watching the horizon, with the calm of someone who had waited 200 years and understood what waiting cost and what it was worth. Nobody made a speech. Nobody needed to. Lena looked up at the sky, which was turning toward evening, and began to read the stars aloud by name, every constellation, every cluster, every single point of light that the archive had a name for, spoken in order, the way she had been taught as a child, the way every human child had been taught for 3,000 years, so the sky would never become strange to them, so they would always know where they were and where they were going. She spoke for a long time. Nobody asked her to stop.